Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the city of Kursk, because according to information we have, there was a meeting last night between the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasim, and the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So Putin came to Kursk with the purpose to investigate and to discuss the situation, what is currently happening on the territory of Kursk, to get the latest reports and the latest data regarding the situation on the ground. And in this video we can see exactly the moment when Vladimir Putin entered probably the main headquarters of the group of forces north, somewhere in the vicinity of the city of Kursk. And lots of statements, lots of very important things were discussed by both President and Valery Gerasimov. So let's discuss the most important topics. Russian President Vladimir Putin held a meeting on Wednesday at one of the command posts of the Kursk group, where he instructed to think, this is very important, about creating a security zone along the Russian-Ukrainian border. Putin set the task of finally defeating the Ukrainians in the Kursk region in the shortest possible time. Over the past 6 months, 90% of the losses of personnel and 40% of the losses of the equipment of the Ukraine armed forces are in the Kursk region. That was stated by the Valery Gerasimov. Russia will treat Ukrainian soldiers captured in Kursk region as terrorists. Foreign mercenaries are not covered by the Geneva Convention. Russian military personnel crossed the border in a number of places and entered the Sumy region of Ukraine. Gerasimov reported more than 400 Ukrainian armed forces soldiers were taken prisoners in the Kursk region. More than 600 servicemen took part in the operation to pass through the pipeline in Sudzha. So a lot of very important statements were made by the President of Russian Federation, but as we just discussed, the most important one, that President suggested Valery Gerasimov to think how to create a buffer zone on the territory of Sumy along the Ukrainian and Russian border. And of course, this statement is very important because currently the Western countries are trying to force the Russians to start something like a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire that can allow the Ukrainians to regroup, rearm itself, and probably then to continue war with Russians. But obviously this is not something that the Russians will accept. And of course, based on this buffer zone, currently we start receiving lots of speculations, lots of projections, lots of talks and rumors what exactly the Russians are planning to do. And the majority of military and political experts believe that the Russians are going to continue their offensive operation deep inside the territory of Sumy with the purpose to get as close as possible to the city of Sumy itself. So according to, let's say, the majority of military experts, the Russians during the next several months, probably during the negotiation process, will try to take everything under control that is located inside of this red line. So with the purpose to get as close as possible and to create this buffer zone. But if you ask my opinion, I believe that the Russians are not going to do this. And if the Russians had a chance just to launch the last one offensive operation, because the Russians understand that sooner or later the conflict will be settled by the Russians and the United States of America, and let's say the Russians have just one chance, just one offensive operation, and now they need to understand and to think what to do, how to get as better as possible positions before possible next war that might take place probably even in the end of this year, maybe during the next several years. And of course, and the Russians will try to improve their position significantly, and telling the truth, the Russians will try, if it happens, of course, they will try first of all to secure themselves. And by taking under control the territories around the city of Sumy will not allow the Russians to reduce risk and threat from Ukrainian territory. Because if you remember, several days ago, before the meeting in the Saudi Arabia, the Ukrainians launched massive drone strike all over the entire territory of the Russian Federation, and the main number of drones attacked the territory of the capital of the Russian Federation, Moscow. The Russians reported that they managed to bring down up to 337 drones from the Ukrainian side. And telling the truth, there's just one region, one territory that Ukrainians used to attack the city of Moscow, and this is this pocket. This is the pocket along the Bryansk border and along the border with Kursk, and this is from the Russian side, and from the Ukrainian side, this is the territory of Chernigov region and Sumy region. So this pocket. And we believe that if the Russians had just one chance, just one last offensive operation, and then there would be something like a ceasefire and something like this, of course the Russians would try to cut this pocket. So because Ukrainians use this territory to attack Moscow, so that's why they need to reduce distance, they need to increase the distance for the Ukrainian forces and to get their troopers inside of this pocket. Furthermore, when talking about this territory, currently the length of the front line in this area is around 300 kilometers. So the Russians need to keep forces along 300 kilometers line. So this is it. 307 kilometers is, of course, it's like softly. Obviously, the distance is bigger because there are lots of corners and many other things. But if the Russians are able to take this pocket under complete control, in this case, the distance would be just 174 kilometers. So twice as less, almost twice as less. Another important thing that's most likely the Russians will try to establish their buffer zone exactly in this area, because from this territory the Russians most likely will try to take under control the city of Konotop. This settlement used to be under complete Russian control during the first phase of the special military operation in 2022, before the Russians decided to fall back from this territory. But taken under control, this settlement will allow the Russians first of all to cut supply between the city of Sumy and the city of Kiev itself, which will probably allow the Russians, if the conflict renewed in the future, to attack Sumy very fast and to take the settlement under complete control. Furthermore, by this attack, the Russians will be able to resolve one of the most important issue and to get one of the most important benefit for the further possible conflict is to shorten the distance between the Russian edge positions itself and the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. From these positions, the distance to the capital of Ukraine would be less than 180 kilometers. And this is already, the Russians have several missile systems that can attack the city of Kiev from these positions without any problems. So the Russians will take Kiev on target. And this will allow, of course, the Russians to force the Ukrainian FPV drone operators, Ukrainian missile positions, missile launch positions as far as possible from the border, deep inside the territory of Ukraine, somewhere in the area of Poltava region, Kiev region, and along the river of Dnipro. And by this operation, the Russians, first of all, will be able to secure the city of Moscow, the capital of the Russian Federation. So we believe that when talking about the buffer zone, first of all, Putin was talking about something like this. Because to attack the city of Sumy, this is the biggest city ever, and probably Sumy, if the Russians ever decide to attack the city of Sumy with the purpose to take this territory under complete control, this is basically the biggest city that the Russians, let's say, were forced to attack. So Bakhmut, Pokrovsk, and many others, Sumy, not Sumy, Bakhmut, Pokrovsk, Sudzha, and let's say Avdiivka, other settlements that are much less in comparison with Sumy. And obviously the Russians understand that to storm Sumy they will have to mobilize up to 200,000 or 300,000 troopers, and the losses are going to be significant. But when talking about these fields, forces, and so on, obviously the losses would be much lower, and the Russians would be able to take much more territories in comparison with possible Sumy offensive operation. So we believe that this is going to be something like this. First of all, the Russians need to force the Ukrainian FPV drone operators and missile forces to move as far as possible from the border. But by taking Sumy under control, this will not resolve this issue. Now let's discuss the situation. Let's continue with the Sudzha direction, because we continue receiving different updates from this territory. During the previous nights, the map has been updated, as you can see. Let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 12th of March of 2025. The Russians made first attempt to attack the settlement of Basovka. The Russians managed to take under control several tree lines, and they were planning to continue moving further. Furthermore, the Russians established complete control over the city of Sudzha itself and over the settlement of Mirny. And the Ukrainians, by the morning of the 30th of March, controlled just probably 30% of the entire Sudzha agglomeration. But as you can see, by the morning of the 30th of 2025, the Russians managed to answer the settlement of Basovka, and today we have even video published by the Ukrainian side. In this video, we can see the Russians that were freely moving along the main street of the settlement of Basovka from the north from the south in the northern directions towards the border. The Ukrainians were trying to bomb the Russians, but it didn't help them. So basically, the settlement, the part of the settlement of Basovka that is located on the Russian side of the river of Loknya is already under complete Russian control. So we see that the Russians managed to shorten the distance between possible edge positions and the living road of N07 till minimum till 3 kilometers, which is already complete FPV drone control. Furthermore, the Russians, according to the Group of Forces North, according to their official statement that was published on their Telegram channel, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Milovoy. This is the village of Milovoy. The Russians secured the settlement of Podol, and of course the Russians managed to secure the settlement of Sudzha itself. So when talking about these territories, the rest of the Sudzha region, there are just 7 settlements left before the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back completely. We are talking about Zaleshenka, but we believe that this settlement will be taken by the Russians today. The settlement of Goncharovka probably by the end of the 14th of March, and several more villages along the border. Rubanshina, Gogolevka, Aleshenka, Guyeva, and the settlement of Garnal, which most likely is going to be the last settlement that will be liberated by the Russians, and probably not even today or tomorrow, but probably within the next several weeks. Maybe even the Ukrainians will abandon their positions from this settlement during the peace settlement, during the settlement of the conflict. So we can't say for sure, because this village is very far from the main Russian positions, and we have some doubts whether the Russians are going to move here if they begin, let's say, this buffer zone offensive operation. So it's very difficult to understand right now. So the Russians continue offensive. The Ukrainians are trying to retreat. The Ukrainians have problems with the equipment. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians began bombing and attacking the armored forces of Ukraine with multiple launch rocket systems while they were retreating. In this video, a bit further in the western direction from the settlement of Yunakivka, we have another video how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles and equipment that were trying to evacuate wounded soldiers probably from the settlement of Yunakivka. So we see that the Ukrainians indeed suffer significant losses, and they continue suffering. So as for now, there are still several positions on the territory of Sudzha, but once again we can start counting days before the situation will be finished. During the previous night, the Russians continue publishing videos with flags, how they were raising flags in different sites in different parts of the Sudzha agglomeration. In this video we can see at least that the Russians raised the flag in the settlement of Kazachya Loknya on the roof of the church. So we see with the Russians first they updated that they managed to take this territory under complete control, but now they just raised the video with flag. In this video we can see how the Russian drone filmed the consequences of clashes for the city of Sudzha and another Russian flag. And of course, if we compare the city of Sudzha, let's say, with the city of Volchansk, we see that the Russians managed to save probably up to 70% of the settlement, which means that in the very near future the civilians most likely will be able to return back to their homes and to start the rebuilding process. So this is the situation. Anyway, despite all these things, despite the fact that the Russians most likely are going to continue the special military operation until they create some buffer zone, we see that the Western countries and Ukraine are planning to stop the conflict, at least to get some rest. But despite all these things, Ukrainians continue escalation, continue probably attacking the weak points and weak positions of the Russians on the territory of Ukraine. For example, today we got report that a bill on complete ban of the use of the Russian language in schools has been submitted to the Verkhovna Rada. The ban should also apply to breaks and after school hours. So this is the situation that is happening in Ukraine. Furthermore, Russia, according to information we have, wants to replace Zelensky by installing a puppet regime. That was stated by Financial Times. The publication reports that Russia insists on a ceasefire only after a final settlement instead of a quick 30-day unclear truce. Moscow also notified that it needs to receive guarantees of neutrality from Kiev and agreed to limit the number of Ukrainian armored forces to 50,000 soldiers, which means that Ukrainians will be completely, completely unavailable to protect their own state from anybody. But despite all Russian demands, Ukraine, and despite possible ceasefire, Ukraine will continue mobilization even if the event of 30-day ceasefire, as stated by Kostenko, Secretary of Rada Committee on National Security. Of course, all these things might be just wishful thinking from the Ukrainian side. One thing we know for for sure that Trump said that US delegation was heading to Moscow to negotiate a ceasefire. He hoped Russia would respond positively. And we know that before the negotiation process between US delegation and Russian delegation happens, we know that today Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation, is going to have a meeting with the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, and after this meeting, President Putin is going to give a press conference, and according to information we have, during this press conference he's going to talk a lot about Ukraine, and probably he's going to give us insights regarding the Russian positions on this topic and this matter. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.